Stan, we're live.
And thank you, Larry, the Liberty Guy. Welcome back to In the Dugout. I am your host, Mike Stenhouse, and we're going with just the basic RI hat tonight because we'll be talking pretty much mostly about Rhode Island today, and probably mostly for the rest of the during this legislative session. Looks like most of the national suspenses has quieted down. We hope, and what's going to happen in our legislature and how that's going to affect your lives, your pocketbook, your kids' education is what we're going to focus on. All right. So first of all, update. Rhode Island is still under a state of emergency imposed by a tyrannical governor. We still have a General Assembly that refuses to intervene, even though it's their power. And we're gonna, I think, have her as a guest next week, but you may have listened to Governor Raimondo's State of the State address. We'll talk more about that later. But you might have heard the reaction from the Republican side, Jessica De La Cruz. So we're going to talk about that, the governor and the response. The governor stressed minimum wage. Does she understand we're in a pandemic? You understand businesses are struggling to keep the lights on? We'll talk about that, and I'll try to stay calm. We're going to have two guests today. We're going to have near the bottom of this hour, about 10, 15 minutes an hour, we're going to have Joanne Giannini, an old friend of mine. She's a former state rep, and she has thrown her hat into the applicant pool. It's not a candidate race per se, but she has thrown her hat in as a former, 15, 16-year rep or more. We'll get the details when she's on, but she's thrown her hat in the ring for lieutenant governor. And we'll discuss the whole lieutenant governor issue. We had Steve Frias on last week to talk about that. So we'll go over some of that stuff with Joanne as well as how some others are really making a circus out of this whole applicant online application for lieutenant governor. And then at the bottom of the hour and for the rest of the show, we'll have our traditional Thursday everything COVID with Dr. Andrew Boston, the renowned epidemiologist who's not afraid to buck the status quo. What we love about Dr. Boston, he's willing to think outside the box, and he's willing to answer your questions. So, put your questions over here in the YouTube chat if you're watching live for Dr. Boston, and we'll circle back and try to get those. Batter up, says Roland on our YouTube comments. Yes, batter up. Okay, so before I get into it, this state is so screwed up. For since Governor Raimondo declared a state of emergency, when was it, March last year? We've had an imbalanced government. We've had tyrannical government, executive branch ruling everything, issuing edicts and executive orders arbitrarily, not based on the data. And there's been no balance of power, no check from the General Assembly. The courts have refused to intervene. Completely unbalanced. That's what tyranny is. When government acts without the consent of the people, or at least the elected representatives of the people. Cowardly General Assembly. I don't blame the governor so much. That's what you do. Hey, someone leaves a space, you take it. But think where we are now. We have no government right now. Well, we have no leadership in government right now. Governor Raimondo, afraid to do anything that might upset her nomination as Commerce Secretary, has been completely AWOL except for her little grandstanding last night on the State of the Union address, which she should never have given. State of the Union address is meant to look forward, what's going to happen in the coming year for the state. That should have been Dan McKee's job. Instead, Gina Raimondo used it to grandstand, and she said nothing. But she's also not governing. Where in the world is Dan McKee? Who's running Rhode Island right now? For 9 months, we had one person running it. Now we have nobody. We have nobody. We have a governor who's afraid to pop her head out of the ground. Again, except for grandstanding. We have a lieutenant governor who's refusing to seize power or take control or show any leadership. Today's COVID-19 weekly Thursday update was a complete mess. Dr. Nicole Alexander Scott, whatever you think of her as a health leader, is not the person you want leading a press conference. She's terrible. Where's Dan McKee? Where's Gina Raimondo? Somebody. I mean, everything is upside down. It's just unbelievable. All right, I want to, next week, by the way, we're going to have Judge Bob Flanders, the case in Barrington, that supposed hate crime. Wait till you hear some of the details of this. Supposed hate crime of that Dr. Gordon has been half decided. There's still an issue open left there. We'll talk about that with Judge Flanders, whose firm is representing Dr. Gordon. And we hope to have on Jessica De La Cruz, who gave the response to the governor's State of the Union last night. And she hit it on the head, too. We're not going to spend much time on her today, but she said the Rhode Island legislature's refusal to reconvene or to conduct basic oversight of the governor, i.e. all her executive orders and other mandates, allowed for continual, unilateral, and unchecked power by the executive branch. Bingo. Senator Jessica De La Cruz nailed it. Nailed it, at least in that statement. We'll have her on, I think, next week. Larry, the Liberty Guy, we confirm with that for next week? Let's have Larry jump in.
Working on it, Stan.
Working on it. All right, so we're going to invite her. We hope she will join us. Okay. I want to thank you all. We've had a tremendous response to the column we discussed yesterday that I had published nationally on Breitbart with my commentary about Gina Raimondo as Commerce Secretary, how that will be a downgrade for America, but an upgrade for Rhode Island, unfortunately for her, but good for our state. I mean, getting out I one of my roommates from college actually met Gina many years ago and said, she didn't strike me as someone that radical left. And she wasn't radical left 8 years ago when she was treasurer, or even when she was first running for governor. But boy, did she turn left quickly. So to have a liberal, progressive, identity politics person, out of our state, out of the executive chair in our state, can only be good for Rhode Island. Dan McKee may be a lot weaker, a lot less proactive, but at least he's not going to be progressive left in his own soul. All right, in Raimondo's talk last night, it's just so many, I don't know how to describe this. We talk about the land of Never Land, right? The progressive left land and make believe. And Gina Raimondo's living in that land. And it's just unthinkable what she's going to do in Washington, D.C. How she's going to get away with some stuff. We worked, I'm going to read some quotes to her from last night. We worked with businesses to give Rhode Islanders the skills they need to get actual jobs in growing fields. They wouldn't need to get new skills in new fields if they could keep their jobs in their original fields. Okay? Training is the liberal answer to everybody. Retrain you, reskill. I mean, you heard what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris said. Well, we're sorry about the 11,000 coal workers. Pipeline workers that just got laid off. But we'll retrain you. What did Kamala Harris say? We're going to retrain you, the vice president. We're going to retrain you to dig up mines? Where? In Afghanistan? Where? Training is only necessary when there's not enough regular jobs. So instead of retraining people in a crappy job environment, how about we have a good job environment? And people don't have to get retrained. Listen, training and education is always good, but the need for it doesn't have to be as great as it is. He went on to say, quote, "I'm especially proud that we're building an economy that works for workers in partnership with labor," very important. "We've increased wages for childcare and home care workers, jobs held primarily of women of color." Gotta get that in there. Political correctness, wokeness. "And we've guaranteed paid sick leave and family leave." Okay. And this is a classic conservative, progressive argument. This just proves for every one of those things she said is good for workers is terrible for employers. We don't have a worker shortage in the state. We have a jobs shortage in the state. We cannot have good and good paying jobs without good and good running companies. Yet it's the companies that are always the target of the left. He says, "We put Rhode Island on a path to be the first state powered 100% by renewable energy by the end of this decade." Do you understand that as a complete fantasy pipe dream? That's a complete fantasy. Even if we had the will to do it and could afford to do it, which we don't have either, there is not that supply of energy available or will be available. This is never land again, folks. It's just unbelievable. These upside down, pretend, fantastical ideas that they stake their whole political careers on. She says, "We've quadrupled the number of public pre-K classes, made by all-day kindergarten a reality for every child." You know what that was all about? Pre-K and all-day kindergarten, more union teacher jobs. That's all it's about. We all know that pre-K doesn't help kids any better. It's about more union dues paying jobs. It's another special interest gig that Gina Raimondo went on. Make community college tuition free, same thing, more professors, more students, more dues paying union professors. And then the minimum wage. He says, "And we've raised the minimum wage 4 times. Let's keep going like it's a cheerleader. Let's pretend we're not in a pandemic. Let's pretend that businesses aren't struggling. Let's pretend that there are so many jobs out there that employers can afford to pay more." She says, "Now more than ever, hardworking people need a raise. They need a job." Raising the minimum wage will create fewer jobs, will lead to fewer jobs. You can't create fewer jobs. It will lead to fewer jobs, and it'll lead to fewer hours for those who remain working. Yeah, some people get a raise, but it's not worth the price. I mean, and just yesterday, right on cue, I'm sure it was staged that way. The Senate Labor Committee voted 7-4. They needed the help of leadership to come in and cast their votes to pass a $15 minimum wage bill. So we'll go to the full Senate. The House is looking at a $15 bill as well. Who knows what will happen, but we'll keep you posted. I mean, did you see the story in Long Beach last night? Now, similar to a minimum wage, the town of Long Beach required that all employers pay hourly workers, I think it was an extra $4 an hour as, I don't know, I forget what they called it, first responder pay, or, pay for, working in positions that, what am I trying to say? Positions, like grocery workers who are always interacting with people. I forget what they call the term for that. Larry, jump in if you remember. But
essential workers.
What's that?
Essential workers.
No. There's a. It's because they took great risks in working. There's a term for it, but hazard pay. That's it. They wanted to increase hazard pay. Thank you. By $4, and that's the same to raising the minimum wage. So what did the Kroger food store chain do? They closed 2 of their stores. They said, we can't afford it. It's a fantasy that you can raise minimum wages, especially during these difficult times, and not expect to be a loss of work, whether that's a loss of jobs or a loss of hours worked. That's real. I don't know how many hundreds of people in those 2 Kroger stores out there in Long Beach, California. This is what happens. It's inevitable. It's the physics. I mean, the laws of economics. And then, similar to that, here's a little funny on Joe Biden. And no, those aren't your adoring fans, Joe. That's the unemployment line of all the people you laid off from the Keystone Pipeline. Democrats have been, I'm sorry to say it, but Democrats have become the party of job killers. We're the job killers. It's unthinkable how you could just lay off 11,000 Americans. And then those are the direct, then all the vendors, all the groups that supply food or supplies to the pipeline, all those vendors are going to lose jobs. So it's kind of compounded. And while it's 11,000 pipeline workers directly, you're probably talking 3 to 4 times that many workers will either lose jobs or lose some work because of it. So this is the state we're in. They're looking to make matters worse, and we have virtually no leadership in our. We went from a tyranny to nothing. So I don't know. One person who wants to be a leader in the state is Joanne Giannini. So let's bring Joanne back into the show, and we will welcome Joanne to In the Dugout. Joanne, unmute yourself and say hello to all your millions of adoring fans.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Hi, Joanne. All right. I know you have a cap ready for me. What do you got?
Ew. A Disney World.
Oh, beautiful.
Mickey hat.
No, it's a Mickey hat. I see a heart on there. And okay, that's great. Now you can keep it on or take it off. Just it's up to you. I keep mine on all the time. It's up to you, but we have a little fun with it. So it makes it informal. So welcome. Good to see you again, Joanne.
Good to see you too.
So you were in the General Assembly for about 16 years, from 94 to 2010. You were a state rep from what was it, District 7, was it? Providence?
Yes.
I think you would you moderate or conservative Democrat? You would describe yourself?
I would say I was a moderate Democrat.
Okay. You've been very active since. You've worked for the state for many years since.
I worked for the city. Actually, I worked 16 years as a state representative.
Right.
I did have a career prior to that where I was a purchasing agent for the city of Providence for 27 years. So I did a lot of work with small business and large businesses, and a lot of work on restructuring the purchasing system in the city of Providence under former Mayor Paolino's administration.
Very good. You are an avid writer. You write for all kinds of publications. You have your own blog. You've written for any number of groups. So, one of the things, I got to say it just so people know who you are. One of the things you became nationally famous for when you were a rep was your fight against a loophole that you say and did allow for indoor prostitution. And it kind of bled over into human trafficking issues and all that. But you led the charge on that, and you did get the prostitution law changed in this state, did you not?
Yes, we closed the loophole because we found that I had done a human trafficking bill in 2007, and it was ineffective because of the loophole for indoor prostitution. And they couldn't prosecute the traffickers. So we had to go in, and it took 4 years to get the.
Yeah, I know. It was quite a battle. I remember reading about it often. Well, congratulations on that. You've also received, I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm looking at a long list of community service and other awards you've received. I'm just trying to build up your background because you have taken advantage of Governor McKee's offer to accept applicants for, whoever he will appoint as the next lieutenant governor, and you put your name in. Isn't that correct?
I did. I saw that he had invited people on TV to apply, so I did. I went on the Actually, I initially sent him an email, and then I forwarded my resume through the website that he advertised.
Now, do you know Dan personally?
I've met Dan McKee through government, but I don't know him that
Okay.
way.
So
No.
why do you think you're a good candidate for lieutenant governor?
I served 16 years in the legislature. Okay, and we went in under tough times. 1994, I went in, and I have a good background and did a lot of laws, not in just trafficking, but a lot of laws. I was the first person that put in the bill to eliminate the car tax in 1995, and I
Wow.
was a freshman legislator. So in 1997. I did the commission to study the both elimination of both the car tax and the inventory tax.
Oh, the tangible assets tax, yeah.
Exactly. And
That's a
then
kill. Those are both just unnecessarily aggravating taxes to business people and to Rhode Islanders. So
in
thanks.
1998, I co-sponsored, Tony Pivus was the chairman. I co-sponsored the elimination of the car tax called
All right.
1998, which was supposed to be completely gone by 2005.
All right. Great accomplishment, but I want to look forward, right? Rhode Island has the worst business climate in the country. I don't think Gina Raimondo did anything to improve that. The lieutenant governor, the only, one of its only kind of loosely defined roles is to kind of lead the small business council or something like that. So with a focus on small business, what would be your message as lieutenant governor to the businesses, not who are just struggling because of the pandemic, but also because of Rhode Island's harsh business climate, the worst in America? What would you say? What would you say to them?
I would say to them that they need to be heard. They need to have, I know when I was purchasing agent, we started seminars so that we could bring in minority and women-based enterprises, businesses, and teach them how to apply for bidding in the city. A lot of people do not know the procedures, do not know how to do it. I think we need to have a hands-on communicator in the lieutenant governor's office. And I know
I know
Lieutenant
communication is great, but what ideas do you have right now that will help the small business? Yes, you want to hear and maybe you'll modify, but what ideas do you bring to the table right now?
I think the main thing we have to do is let these people have a seat at the table, be heard, and really help them. Just to say that we're going to give them another hour for opening is not enough.
You agree with raising the minimum wage to $15?
Raising the minimum wage is something that I've been supportive gradually. I think right now it's a tough time to do that. I fear that we'll have, a lot of these jobs, and a lot of people don't realize this, and I'll say it, it's the truth. Young people and even seniors, you see them working in different, they're getting these jobs after they retire because they can't live on their pensions. And a lot of young kids in school work their way through school. What happens to them? Do they lose this employment? Do they lose this opportunity? Are there lesser workers because a business is suffering under a pandemic that we had no control of? And what are we saying to them? Okay, you step aside. We're going to take care of Peter and bury Paul.
Yeah, well, that's the Rhode Island way. All right, I want to switch gears. I want to show you something here. So, with this, I was very critical of Dan McKee for doing this online application. Nothing to do with, he put it out there. You were smart enough to take advantage of it. But I think it was a weak and pandering thing for him to do. I don't think it exhibits leadership, decisiveness. He should have ideas on who he wants for lieutenant governor. He should make the decision. That's my view on it. But because he's put it out there, It's now kind of turned into a circus. Everybody's publicly lobbying for who should be. Here's a former state senator. Oh, what happened to it? Here's a former state senator who who's openly campaigning and raising money. I promised to lead Donna for Rhode Island. That means for lieutenant governor. Support me. Please send an email to Governor McKee. Tell him I'm gonna be a great lieutenant governor and donate. Every one of her pages has donate right at the top of it. So she's raising money off of this. Has this turned into a circus, this whole online application thing, Joanne?
I don't think it's right. I want to be perfectly clear. When I first heard that Dan McKee was going to be the governor, and we weren't quite sure at the time how it was going to be done, if the legislator were going to pick, if he was going to pick, if new laws were going to be made. But I immediately, before any of this, sent him an email, which I did not hear anything back on, but I did send it, a formal email asking to meet with him or talk to him about the position. I had no idea he was going to put it online like that. When I did see it on the news, then I said, okay, I have to comply with this. But I did, before that, send him an email. I did not go on Facebook. This is the first time, other than one other show that I'll be going on.
Yeah, you haven't been openly campaigning. Appearing on a show is fine, but it's not like you're prostituting yourself out there for it, right?
No,
Make a little fun.
I want to be clear on that I believe that the job should go to the best qualified person. It doesn't have to do with that ethnicity or gender. It should be who's best qualified. And I applied because I have 27 years in city government, 16 in state. And I would match that record with any one of the applicants. If I was,
we're looking here. Dan York says it's a charade too. He writes down here. So yeah, I think so. I mean, my biggest thing, Joanne, is I think it's not a sign of decisive leadership to sort of pander to the public this way. Let me ask you, we've only got a few more minutes left. Let me ask you a few other questions about the lieutenant governor. Republicans, Steve Frias, have been calling to end the position totally. We don't need it. It's $1 million, the staff of 7, and the salary is a waste of money. There's no defined role. They're not necessarily in sync with the governor. Do you think Rhode Island needs a lieutenant governor position?
yes, I do, especially under this time with the pandemic and everything going on. And the people need an advocate. I would want to be the people's advocate. I would want to be the one that would be able to say the people's interest and be there and work closely with the lieutenant governor and tell him how the general public, I have my ear to the ground. As you said, I write for several different publications. I'm a freelance writer, but I have a lot of experience. I am on social media a lot. I have like 5 Facebook pages. Rhode Island News Review.org is my news page where I do a summary every morning of all the state and national news. I work hard at it. I work hard at being at it. And I applied, but I did it discreetly, and I leave that to the lieutenant governor for his choice out of respect. I didn't go on Facebook and make like, I think I should get this like a contest, because I think that cheapens it. I think it makes it look cheap. I think that we need to have the position.
All right, let me ask you this then. You think we need it? Do you at least agree? Well, not at least, but do you agree that it should be a separate election, that the lieutenant governor and the governor should run as a ticket, so at least we know? Because what we saw with McKee and Raimondo is they were like, duck and water, or oil and vinegar. They didn't go to oil and water. They didn't. So do you think they should at least run on the same ticket?
I have no opposition to them on the same ticket, but there is something to be said for check and balances, but I think that in McKee and in the governor's case, lack of communication is not good. I would say that the lieutenant governor has to work closely with the governor, because look at what happened here. I mean, he wasn't involved in any of that coronavirus meetings or anything. It's not fair to him, but I do believe that he's going to be hands-on and get in there and do the job, because he's had leadership skills being a mayor. But definitely has to be a close relationship. So I would have no opposition to running on the same ticket.
All right, so speaking of that, final question, and thank you for your time. So Sunday, you're going to be on with Joe Paolino's show.
Right.
We're in the dugout. He's in the arena, so we're kind of got the same idea. He doesn't make you wear a cap, though, does he?
No, but cap back
Wear
on.
a cap, isn't it? Fun to wear a cap.
I told you why I wore the cap, because of all the people that lost their jobs in Disney World.
Right, right.
And
So the show's on Sunday, 7 a.m. So if you want to hear more from Joanne there, but here's my question for you. We know that, so I'm just doing a little promo for your show there, but here's the question. We know that Joe Paolino, he's been on my show.
right.
He's openly expressed interest in running as governor. You worked for him in the past. You're on his show regularly. I used to be on the show with you regularly. Let's pretend there is a ticket of governor and lieutenant governor in 2022. Can we expect a Paolino Giannini ticket?
Oh, boy. I've asked Joe if he would run so many times, but Joe is so involved in his business, and he always keeps giving me the same two words. It depends.
He was pretty confident in our show when we talked to him about a month ago. So,
But
all right, Joanne, you're a great sport. Thank you for being with us on In the Dugout. Thanks for
thank you
wearing
for-
that great cap, and good luck. Let us know how you make out, or if you hear anything interesting from the soon-to-be Governor McKee's office.
Thank you.
Joanne
Have a good-
Giannini, former state rep, applicant for the job of Rhode Island Lieutenant Governor. Good luck. She's fun. She's fun. I gotta tell you that. Joanne, I've known Joanne for a number of years now, and she's a good egg, and she cares about this state. And she was smart enough to take advantage of this online application process, which I think is silly, but hey, if you're gonna have it, we should do it. So I know Dr. Boston is going to be joining us in just a few minutes, and we've got quite a bit, as always, to discuss with him. COVID-19, with the vaccines, with cases going down, with hospitalizations going down, which we'll review with the doctor soon. Have we turned the corner here? I mean, and I'm interested, can Rhode Island can we end this gosh darn state of emergency we're in? And can we return, like we started the top of the show, and return to normal government, normal balance of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch? Again, for 9 months, we've had tyranny from the executive branch, and we've had nothing, zero from the cowardly General Assembly. They could be stepping in right now if they chose to. Obviously, Gina, so Dan McKee, when he gets inaugurated and sworn in next week, we think, Gina Raimondo was cleared by the Senate committee yesterday. Not exactly sure when the full Senate will vote on her, but I'm sure she rigged it or asked it not to happen until after her embarrassing State of the State address. Of course, the media fawned all over her, right, last night, but it was this morning, and again, you saw it, and we announced that I had my op-ed on Raimondo. The reality, it's the fake world, the pretend world of Gina's success. But I wrote what I thought was the reality situation. So go to Breitbart.com and just do a search for me and read my article if you haven't seen it yet. It was an honor for me to be published nationally. And I think I pretty much told the story the way it is. So, so that was on Breitbart.com. All right, I see that Dr. Bostom has joined the show. Andy, welcome back. How are you?
Good. How are you, Mike? Great op-ed that you wrote there.
Oh, thank you kindly. Thank you. Yeah, it was actually a colleague of mine's idea to do it, and so I just touched up a statement our center made, and he had a contact at Breitbart. We sent it to him, and bingo, there it is. So anyway, okay, where I don't know. Before we get into date or anything, I haven't really paid attention to COVID nationally or locally. I've seen the headlines about Rhode Island's vaccine, but COVID, just some general comments from you. COVID nationally, COVID in Rhode Island. We'll get into the specifics here later, but just some general thoughts from you, Andy. Right?
Yeah,
now.
the trends are very good. They're very positive. I think it's a combination of things. We may be able to attribute a little bit to the vaccination program, but I think it's too early to attribute much of what we're seeing. But what we're seeing is a steady decline in cases, hospitalizations, and now, since deaths lag, even deaths are coming down. Again, without getting into the caveat.
And this is nationally.
This is nationally, and this is without getting into the caveat about all the flaws and what starts with the testing and then bleeds its way into the entire system. The phenomenon is improving regardless of those pitfalls, and I think we have to attribute it to the fact that there was I think we've mentioned this before, Mike. There was a terrible coronavirus at the time. The word plague was used in the late 19th century. The worst hit country, I believe, at the time was Russia, then Russia. And that particular coronavirus became endemic, became seasonal, and is one of the 5 circulating, coronaviruses, which by and large cause more of a cold syndrome than a cold flu syndrome. And I think, we're probably seeing some of that phenomenon beginning already with COVID-19. At any rate, the trends are very positive. They're mirrored in the state. We'll go over some of that data.
Let me ask you a question, Doc. You just made me think of something. So I know you're a researcher. Are you pretty up on the history of pandemics throughout the world, like in the last 100 years and all that too? Has that been part of your research?
No, very spotty, spotty, Mike. I'm not going to lie to you.
So let me ask you this anyway, even if you're not an expert. So 100 years ago, I mean, most pandemics are worldwide. You think of the plagues that went through Europe and all that. I mean, there were severe symptoms with sores and all that kind of stuff. 100 years ago, without those visually presenting symptoms, would anybody even have thought that we were in a pandemic 100 years ago? Whether they thought we just, was this just another?
You don't have to go back 100 years, Mike. We can go back to the 1957-58 influenza A pandemic, which came out of the Far East, which came out of Hong Kong, and actually even some of the writing back then was and I don't think there's anything to validate this, but there was some speculation that the Chinese communists had something to do with that. Back in the
no, let's not go there.
Even magically, even though it came from Hong Kong, I guess the theory was they got it into Hong Kong. Who knows? But there was some speculation. No, I think actually now there's much more very concrete evidence. But that pandemic, which arrived with our it actually arrived in Newport in the United States via our Navy, and just spread wildly. And if you adjust the 1957-58 population both in total size and then shift the demography towards what we have now, which is a much more older population, the estimates are that would have killed about 500,000. The country did not lock down. There were selective and brief school closures. There were cancellations of some sporting events and things like that. But life basically went on. And so, but if you go back to the end of World War I and the
Right.
Wilson era.
That the Spanish
Uh,
flu, yeah.
Yeah, that was far more
Yeah.
devastating.
All right.
At
Did that
least
did
20
that present symptoms other than
Oh,
just?
oh yes, and the other striking difference between that, and actually to a certain extent, 57, 58.
I mean, because visually, this flu, this China virus, does not have visual symptoms, right?
Well, no, I mean, in the group that's hardest hit, it's horrific. You know,
Oh, I know it's
multi-organ,
deadly, but
yeah, multi-organ system failure. You know, very dramatic presentations.
I
when
mean,
people are really
so
sick.
even 100 years ago, they would have known that something weird is going on here. This isn't just
Oh,
old
with
people
the
dying,
Spanish
right?
flu, it also was striking across the age spectrum.
Okay, all right.
This is very, very selective to the elderly, particularly the frail elderly.
All right. Two questions from our, before we get into the charts and things, two questions from our YouTuber. So first of all, some discussion on masks and, you know, having to wear a mask for 3 hours on a flight, which you're pretty much required to do. Let me ask you
By
this.
the way, that was that the CDC. I don't know how this works legally, Mike, but the CDC issued an order that cited, you know, existing U.S. code that nationally now all transportation
Yeah,
is
I know.
it's a penal offense to.
So here's my question. We're thinking of the masks that tightly cover and kind of, you know, with the face shields, you know, with the big plastic shields where you can breathe better, do they qualify as a mask?
No,
And
not according to the CDC edict that was just put out. They don't
those plastic shields do not count.
No, like, you know, that look like the old welders.
Yeah,
you know, for
yeah.
lack of, yes, yeah, no, they don't qualify. They don't
Really?
qualify. No, they don't. You can wear one of those, but you still have to wear a mask underneath it.
Huh.
So no, it doesn't qualify.
I mean, a mask, the stuff's going to come out straight. With that, it's going to go straight down, right?
Like we have a literature. We have a literature on masking that goes back 2 decades, covers influenza thoroughly, and at least one major study in coronavirus, the Dan mask trial, close to 5,000 persons, and no statistically significant benefit. This is wrong. This is just certain things, you know, you can debate. This is just wrong because that's the reason we do trials, Mike.
Now, the doctor you quoted on the CT values from Rhode Island, Dr. Leonard Mrna, this is a Providence Journal article from a few days ago, says masks are going to be with us for a long, long while.
Yeah, I with all due respect to Dr. Mrna, it's non-evidence based that they're doing anything. I mean, forget about the trials. Just look at what's happened with the cycling through in the different waves, so-called, of coronavirus. That there's really, they've afforded no protection. They've done nothing.
All right. The other question, shifting
which, by the
gears
way, is very consistent with the clinical trial literature where they didn't do anything.
All right, so I'm shifting to vaccine. So we had a question from Louise. Can the doctor explain how the mRNA gene therapy can be called a vaccine? I hear Radio House calling it an inoculation. This technology does not meet the criteria of a vaccine.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
No, it's not a therapy. It's not a gene therapy. It has nothing to do with genes whatsoever. You know, the mRNA, very simply, is a string of nucleotides, a short string of nucleotides, which does its thing outside the nucleus in a part of the cell called the ribosome, produces a protein that's recognized by our immune system, and the mRNA, once it does its thing, is fairly rapidly degraded. So it has no interaction with our genome, which is, you know, in the nucleus.
And what's the difference between a vaccination, and an inoculation?
I don't know. People can use them.
They're the same thing?
Interchangeably.
Okay.
An inoculation is something that's injected into your skin.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, so it could be. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Let's look at the charts. So, you know, we know in Rhode Island the cases have really been going down from over 1,000 a day down to, you know, the other day 200 or 300, 400 or 500 now, but they're really on a steep decline down, and that shows up in this positivity rate.
Right. So we're seeing a really nice trend where the positivity rate since the beginning of November, it went up and spiked in early December. But over the last 2 months, it's come down by and large to now where we definitely seem to be in a strong downward trend. And we hope that persists. Mike, this is obviously this has to have very little to do with the vaccine. We've administered what is it now on the website? Maybe over 100,000 at least
Yeah.
one-time injections.
Yeah.
It's very recent. Small number of people, relatively small number of people have gotten their second dose, and then it takes another couple of weeks after that for the immune system to really rev up. So obviously these trends, which you just showed for infection, now we're seeing the same thing in terms of hospitalization. It's a nice, steady downward trend now. This is happening as a result of naturally acquired immunity, and there's a certain seasonality to there's a rhythm to these viruses. Same thing, thank goodness, with mortality. It's there's a little lag, and there may be occasional spikes from people who are very sick and in the ICU and holding on and then expire. But basically, it's also a nice downward trend.
All right, and just to answer the question, I pulled it up quickly here. Here is one chart of the vaccine. So it looks like we're up to 80,000 total, almost 80, and it looks like 20, almost 30 of those have gotten the second dose.
Okay. It's progressing. I still have a lot of questions about, I saw the lieutenant governor. I assume he's going to be taking over. I assume Ms. Raimondo will get her job as Commerce Secretary. He was still at the end of last week, at least, he was still talking about prioritizing teachers. Mike, I looked into some. I don't know what the numbers are exactly.
So you sent this today.
Yeah, well, exactly. This is a Biden appointee whom I agree with. I don't agree with many of them, frankly, but no, and actually this is very consistent. The CDC, for all its problems, and there's been a lot of problems with coronavirus, has been fairly consistent on schools. Her predecessor was kind of bozoid on many things, but good on schools. And she's picking up the baton appropriately. But if you look at and I only had statistics that were national, I think it's over 80% of teachers in the United States are under 55 years old. Over 80%, and that's a very low risk group overall. Forget about comorbidity, but that's a very low risk group, even including some with comorbidity overall in terms of coronavirus. There's just stratifying by age.
Yeah, so when you combine the fact that kids aren't natural super spreaders, that
exactly
you social distance and maybe masks help, maybe not, but when you do all those three things, even without a vaccine, that the CDC is saying that teachers are at very little risk.
We have some data from the fall semester too, in schools in North Carolina, where there was in-person teaching, and the documented transmissions through contact tracing were minuscule compared to the infections that were acquired outside the school setting in the community. So right. Teachers are young, where they're relatively low risk. I mean, there could be exceptions with people that have overwhelming comorbidity, and they should be dealt with individually. But teachers are young, students are resistant and are not high transmitters. They should be back in school. And teachers should be back in school within, and if they want to get vaccinated, of course they should be free to find a place to get vaccinated.
All right, so we know we can't talk teachers without talking teachers unions. And then while you may or may not be an expert on that, I brought up on my show, was it yesterday or the day before? Again, while I like Dan McKee, I've met him, I know him a little, I'm not liking some of the early things I'm seeing. He put together, in addition to Governor Raimondo's existing COVID task force, he put together his own COVID transition team. Mm-hmm. And the one name that really jumped out at me on that was Bob Walsh, head of the National Education Association of Rhode Island, the main teachers union in Rhode Island. I mean, there's only one reason Bob Walsh would be on that COVID transition team, and that's to fight or to insist that teachers get vaccinated before either schools are open or they get ahead of the line. I mean, is there any, in your view, is there any reason why teachers should get special treatment?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, they're one of the lower risk occupations.
Now, listen, we love teachers. We don't want anybody to get sick, but
Mike, although sure, I'm sure you can find either teachers that have decided to work well past the retirement age. Small numbers of them, I'm sure. You can find additional teachers that, regardless of age, have profound comorbidity, which puts them at higher risk. Those people should be dealt with individually. But by and large, absolutely not. There's no reason to prioritize teachers. Again, they're not exposed to high viral loads at work, and they tend to be a younger population.
okay, moving on. Now you sent me a lot of information on some more data coming out of India.
Really interesting paper that I had missed, Mike, from the fall.
From the fall. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes. It
so
was
let me just give a
written-
backdrop first. Let me just give the backdrop to anyone who's
Sure.
new watching. So at least in our state and probably even across the country, you were the first, if not one of the first doctors to raise awareness about this thing called the cycle threshold value, which measures how much of the virus is present in a particular sample using the PCR nasal swab test. And you theorize that a lot of people who have low viral loads, therefore high cycle value, are probably really not infectious and probably not contagious. Okay, so we theorize a lot about how that could really help public policy and how that could help individual treatment with a doctor. And we did talk a little bit about some information out of India, but what have you now discovered that India has done with this cycle threshold data that looks like it supports all your theories?
It's a really interesting paper. The challenge is, it's coming out of Gujarat, India, and it's some of the English is a little strained, but it's a very nice report from a major epidemiologist there, basically showing that it's a very practical application of cycle threshold data, and what they're showing is that they divided it up into three ranges. So remember, Mike, it's the cycle threshold is inversely associated with the amount of virus present in the
viral
person
load,
in the
right.
sample. So that the lower the cycle threshold, the more virus present. So the low end in this sample was 17 to less than 24. Then the mid range was 24 to less than 31. And the high range was above 31. And what they found was that if you compared the low end to the high end, so less than 24 to the ranges above, particularly above 31, those people were 8-fold more likely to spread, and this was a contact tracing study, to spread the virus. And what they found overall,
the low end versus the high end?
That's right. And what they found overall was that the 84% in this sample actually had low viral load, i.e. above 31, or 31 to 38 in their sample. And these are the very low risk persons for spreading. And this is very practical, important data. And what they said was that this allowed them, again, in a country which runs the gamut, from state of the art to developing, and it allowed them to triage people and say, look, not only are these people low risk, they don't spread it. So let's focus our attention on those with CT values less than 24, and that's filtered into their clinical recommendations. So it fits perfectly with I object, as you know, to mass asymptomatic testing. But if we have the data on all these people, then for heaven's sake, at least triage at a certain point. Pick your cut point and focus on those people, because those people are much more likely to develop severe disease. They're also much more likely to spread it. So I thought this was a really nice example from, again, a relatively developing country. And their recommendations, the English is not always the best, But it says, if CT values of the positive patients are routinely communicated to the attending healthcare workers, additional care and attention may be exercised to reduce the transmission from such high viral load individuals, again, CT less than 24, and lower the secondary infection. And this is very important. But they also pointed out that 84% of the cases have low viral load and practically will transmit infection to very few of their contacts. If the remaining 16% could be identified and isolated, that was the point of all this. The burden could be reduced.
So how does all this kind of match up with the information with your leadership that our center put out, one of the first American-based analysis of CT value data in Rhode Island? So how does what we saw, you just talked about India, match up with what we saw here with this chart in Rhode Island, where we're showing that over 50% were above a CT value of 30?
Right. And again, we don't know if the systems are directly comparable, but at least qualitatively, we had more than half of our population in a range where they found in India they weren't transmitting. Well, that cuts the burden down considerably. And they really were focused on those people that were less than 24. Do you have our graphic handy? I mean, I can go pull it up. Do we have something that would approximate the number of people that were less than 24? I don't recall off the top of my head.
Which graphic are you referring to?
The one that was put together from the center on Rhode Island that you refer. In other words, the one we were just looking at.
Do
you have the one from
this one here?
Yeah, so I'm looking at it now. So it looks to me like if you look at the 20 to 24 and below, so you've got about, again, it looks like a relatively small percentage, probably less than 30% are going to be less than 24. And that tells you that it's those. Yeah, well, actually, we looked at 25. And so we found 2/3 in Rhode Island were above 25. So if you use that as your cut point, again, Mike, it's dramatic at how you could shift your focus to people that are truly at highest risk. That cuts it down.
And truly contagious, right? And whether you need to lock down people or not and shelter them in place. So the final question.
Again, if we're doing all this testing, Mike, we might as well use the data. This is why it's so frustrating that so okay, great. So bully for all the people involved that put in, the few people involved that put in the FOIA request and finally got some information. But that's it. It died with that request. It's not as if we were able to stimulate the state to do the right thing and publish those, just like we reviewed. Okay, so what was it? We're down to 3.3%. That number is nice, but what are the CTs in all those people? Show us a distribution.
Well, same thing.
We graphed it.
Right. So let's ask this here. So right here we see a headline today: Salve Regina. And they had a little spike, I think 30 cases over a week or something, and
Mike,
they panicked.
Do we know what test this was even based on? Do we know if this is based on confirmed PCR or was it some other test? I heard it on the news. I didn't have a chance to look it up.
I don't know. I don't have the whole article, just a picture of the article here. But again, if we knew the CT values, right, they could determine whether they had to lock the whole place down or not, right?
I think it would be very helpful in sorting out those people that are truly likely to be infectious versus those who aren't, and combine that with symptoms. Did they in the article, did they even talk about how many of the kids were symptomatic, or they didn't even say that?
I didn't look.
That's another thing that's also very important, Mike, is that, and it's often neglected, and that's very basic medicine that goes well beyond this whole debate about cycle thresholds. Is are these people presenting symptomatically or asymptomatically? Because we know symptomatic transmission is what drives the outbreak.
All right. Well, Andy, thanks. As we go, I'll let you put in a plug. Why should people go to allrightfreedom.org/COVID transparency, sign that petition to demand our government start releasing this data anonymously en masse and privately to healthcare providers.
It's very helpful to track, along with just the percentage of positives. It's very helpful to track how the state is doing in terms of what is the average amount of virus that these positive tests are carrying. Because as we saw, Mike, when the cycle thresholds come down, not just the percent positivity, the mortality declines precipitously. And I think for individuals, it's also very important, because now, we're seeing with some of this Indian data that it can be used clinically, that it can be used in a very granular way to help separate out those that are spreading and at higher risk versus those that aren't spreading and at much lower risk.
Andy Boston, Dr. Boston, thank you again for being with us and in the dugout. We'll look forward to more info and more discussion with you next week.
Take care, Mike.
All right, thanks, Andy. So, the frustrating thing here, folks, is government incompetence. Raising minimum wages in the middle, or while we're still struggling, maybe we're hopefully not in the middle, still struggling from pandemic. That's tone deaf. That's advancing an agenda or a narrative over the common sense well-being of the people and businesses they're supposed to govern. Not releasing this CT value data when it could be so helpful in determining public policy, whether certain people need to be locked down, or even certain places. We know lockdowns don't work anyway. If we're going to have them, as Dr. Boston said, let's at least be intelligent about it then. Let's look at all the data, no, we have to have this fear narrative put out there. We're still under a tyrannical rule, even though there's no tyrant sitting in the chair right now. We're still under a state of emergency, completely ruled by the executive branch. The General Assembly refuses to engage, and we have a governor who refuses to engage, other than for public relations. It's going to go on at least a few more days. I don't know when she's going to get confirmed and when McKee's going to be in. Could flow into next week. Who knows? We are a rudderless ship right now in this state. We are completely tone deaf to anything but the wants and demands of the cancel culture political left. They get what they want. And the rest of us pay the price. They get their agenda passed no matter what is going on in the world. Pandemics, shutdowns. Why? I don't know. In this state, we have a feeble Republican Party to fight back. Most want to just go along to get along. Occasionally we'll protest or stand up for something, but don't want to ruffle the ship too much. I mean, people should be jumping up and down on their chairs and their tables saying, enough. We just keep going down this slide towards lack of prosperity. Again, says it all. The more government controls and dictates the narrative and the agenda, the less prosperous we'll be. The more freedom we have and businesses have, the more prosperous we'll be. It's simple. That's why we named our company this. And everything we see is backwards. Everything. And it's just frustrating. So thanks for joining us today for In the Dugout. Mike Stenhouse.